In 1841, a southern plantation owner did something so unthinkable that it shattered the rules of his own world. He handed absolute control of his adult daughter to a man he legally owned. By the end of that year, 13 powerful men were dead. A plantation had vanished in flames, and no official record could explain why. This is the story they tried to erase. In 1841, South Carolina was a place where silence was currency. The land looked peaceful from a distance, rivers moving slowly through cypress swamps, oak trees draped in Spanish moss, rice fields glimmering under the sun. But every inch of that beauty was maintained by violence so normalized it had become invisible. Power lived in names, in land deeds, in whispered meetings behind closed doors. And on one plantation called Cypress Grove, a decision was made that would expose just how rotten that power truly was. Silas Rutledge was not born into greatness. He was close enough to see it, but never close enough to touch it. He owned land, enslaved people, and a respectable house. 58 human beings lived under his authority. That alone made him wealthy by ordinary standards. But in Colleton County, wealth was relative. True power belonged to men who owned hundreds of lives, who moved easily between Charleston and Savannah, whose sons studied law in the North and returned to rule the South. Silas wanted that life more than anything. He had married into respectability. His wife's family name opened doors, but when she died giving birth, those doors slowly closed again. What remained was a daughter, Catherine, and an obsession with status. Catherine was raised in isolation. Tutors came and went. Guests rarely stayed long. By her teenage years, servants learned not to mention her at all. By adulthood, the whispers began. She's unwell. She's unstable. Poor Silas, cursed with a mad daughter. Doctors prescribed laudanum, then more laudanum, mercury compounds, sedatives. Treatments meant to quiet her, never to heal her. By 28, Catherine barely resembled the child she once was. Her body was swollen, her hands trembled, her mind drifted in and out of fog. She screamed during fits. Once she attacked her father with a letter opener, leaving a scar he would carry for life. Society pitied Silas. No one asked why Catherine was screaming. No one asked what she remembered. On April 7, 1841, a letter arrived that would end any illusion of normalcy. It was delivered privately, no return address, sealed in red wax, marked with a symbol Silas had not seen in years. A crossed blade and stalks of grain. The brethren of the harvest. Silas locked himself in his study to read it. The message was short, clinical, devastating. He was in debt, $12,000 accumulated through gambling, failed speculation, and loans extended by men who never forgave. The sum was impossible. Selling land wouldn't be enough. Selling people wouldn't be enough. Bankruptcy would follow, reputation destroyed, influence gone. But the letter offered another option, a demonstration, a public act of submission that proved Silas understood the hierarchy of power, that loyalty mattered more than morality. He was to place his daughter under the full authority of an enslaved man for 1 year, not as a nurse, not as a caretaker, but as her legal superior in every way that mattered, short of paper. The humiliation would be total. The message was clear: prove you value power more than blood. Silas did not sleep that night. He weighed his choices carefully. Lose everything he had built, or sacrifice the last thing society believed sacred. By dawn, he made his decision. Catherine Rutledge was 12 years old the night her childhood ended.
She had gone to bed early, the way obedient children did in houses where silence was safer than curiosity. But Cypress Grove never truly slept. It breathed. Floors creaked, doors whispered, and beneath the house, something moved. She woke to voices, not loud, controlled, measured, men who believed they could speak freely because no one who mattered was listening. Catherine followed the sound barefoot, moving the way she had learned to move her whole life, quiet, careful, unseen. She knew the house better than anyone. She knew which boards betrayed weight, which doors stuck, which corners hid shadows. The sound led her to the kitchen pantry. Behind it was a door she had never noticed before. She watched as her father opened it and descended the narrow stairs with several other men. When the door began to close, Catherine slipped forward and caught it before it latched. She waited. Then she followed. The cellar beneath Cypress Grove was older than the house itself. Stone walls, low beams, air thick with damp and smoke. The smell hit her first, earthy, sharp, wrong. She hid behind a stack of barrels as the men gathered around a heavy table at the center of the room. Candles were lit, robes were donned, words were spoken that made no sense to her, but the tone did. This was not prayer. This was certainty. Then they brought someone forward. A woman, enslaved, bound, terrified. Catherine didn't understand everything that happened next. She didn't have words for it yet, but she understood enough. She understood that her father was not a bystander. She understood that the men she had seen at dinner tables, judges, bankers, ministers, were capable of things no child should witness. And she understood with a clarity that would never leave her, that if she spoke, no one would save her. She did not scream. She did not run. She stayed perfectly still until it was over. Then she went back upstairs, washed her feet, and lay awake until morning. When Catherine finally told someone, it was her father. She chose him because she still believed in the idea of him. Silas listened in silence. Then he told her she had dreamed it. He told her she was imaginative, sensitive, prone to hysteria. When she insisted, he changed tactics. Doctors were summoned. The first prescribed rest. The second prescribed laudanum. The third prescribed mercury. Each dose dulled her memory. Each treatment blurred the edges of what she knew to be true. And every time Catherine fought back, every time she tried to write things down, tried to speak clearly, tried to resist, her father increased the dosage. Years passed that way. Catherine grew into a woman inside a fog. Sometimes she was lucid enough to understand what had been taken from her. Sometimes she wasn't. When she screamed, they restrained her. When she fought, they sedated her. When she remembered, they punished her with more care. By her 20s, Catherine's reputation was sealed. She was unstable. She was dangerous. She was no longer believed, even by herself. But memory is a stubborn thing. Even under layers of poison, fragments survived. The smell of smoke underground, the sound of chanting, the sight of her father raising a cup with calm precision. Those fragments surfaced as rage, and rage, when it has nowhere to go, turns inward. That was the Catherine Ezekiel Cross found when he first stepped into her room, a woman buried alive inside her own body. Ezekiel knew poisoning when he saw it. He had watched overseers do the same thing, keep people docile, dependent, weak enough not to resist, but alive enough to work. Catherine was not sick. She was controlled. When he told her that, something shifted. Not relief, recognition. Recovery was not gentle. The body, after years of dependence, does not forgive quickly. Catherine shook, vomited, burned with fever. Her thoughts came back sharper than her strength. And with clarity came memory, not as confusion, as certainty. She remembered the cellar, she remembered the men, and she remembered the journals she had hidden, pages written during moments of clarity, coded so even if they were found, no one would understand them. For the first time in 16 years, Catherine was not alone with her truth, and for the first time, someone believed her without hesitation. Together, she and Ezekiel did something dangerous. They stopped pretending she was broken, and that made Cypress Grove very unsafe.
Before he had a name at Cypress Grove, Ezekiel Cross had already walked through fire. He had once been a husband, a father, a man who sang while he worked because his children laughed in the fields beside him. His wife, Sarah, was sharp and calm and stronger than he ever admitted aloud. Their cabin wasn't large, but it was full of life. Books hidden in corners, stories told in whispers, secrets passed between generations. Then Silas Rutledge arrived in Virginia with a buyer's warrant and cold eyes. He inspected the enslaved like cattle. He listened politely as Ezekiel demonstrated his skills, carpentry, herbalism, literacy. He smiled when Ezekiel spoke of his family with pride. And then he made a decision that wasn't about money or need. He separated them. He bought Sarah, Benjamin, and Ruth, and not Ezekiel. For no reason, no logic, no excuse, just to prove that he could. Sarah was silent when they were torn apart. Benjamin cried and clung to his father's leg. Ruth was only 6 and couldn't understand why her world was vanishing. Ezekiel begged, bargained, threatened. Silas smiled. That was what Ezekiel remembered most, that smile. It was the last thing he saw before the wagon pulled away. Ezekiel never saw his family again, but he heard stories. The plantation in Alabama where they were sent was known for being brutal. No doctors, no rest, just production, machines made of human labor. Sarah died of fever within a year. Benjamin stepped on a rusted nail. The wound festered. He was 12. Ruth stopped eating. She simply gave up. Ezekiel changed after that. He didn't scream anymore. He didn't beg. He went quiet, focused. He had lost everything, and in that loss he found purpose. He would find the man who destroyed his family. He would walk into that man's house, and he would watch it fall. But escape was not enough. He needed to be sold legally. He needed a paper trail that wouldn't raise suspicion. So Ezekiel began his descent. He got himself transferred, first to a smaller farm nearby, then south, then west, then south again. He let overseers think he was broken, obedient, quiet. He made himself useful, but never threatening. He taught himself the art of being invisible to those who felt invincible. All the while he asked questions, carefully. He learned about the brethren, about secret meetings, about men with land and names and influence. He pieced together the shape of something monstrous, a society not just built on slavery, but something older, something darker, something that believed blood made the soil fertile. He learned of Cypress Grove. He learned the name Silas Rutledge. When the chance came to be purchased by an agent acting for Cypress Grove, Ezekiel took it. He arrived in April of 1841, in the back of a wagon. He made no eye contact until he saw Silas. Then he looked directly at the man who destroyed his world, and for the first time, Silas looked away. The plantation assigned Ezekiel a cabin near the main house, a symbol of trust, a reminder of the hierarchy. But it was also access to the house, to Catherine, to the study, to the cellar. He was told his sole duty was her care. Failure would have consequences. He nodded. Yes, sir. What no one understood was that Ezekiel didn't want to succeed in that role. He wanted revenge. But he had also once been a healer, and when he stepped into Catherine's room for the first time, what he saw was not a madwoman. He saw someone buried under the same weight he carried. He saw someone who survived, someone who remembered. So he changed his plan. He would not destroy Silas alone.
He would do it with the very person Silas tried to erase, and together they would make the land tremble.
The first step to remembering was pain. Mercury leaves the body slowly, like rot refusing to let go. Laudanum leaves like a storm. And Catherine Rutledge had lived inside both poisons for most of her life. Ezekiel weaned her off one dose at a time. He replaced her medicine with herbs he ground himself, valerian root for sleep, chamomile for nausea, milk thistle to help the liver rebuild. They were not magic, they were survival. She shook. She vomited. She hallucinated. But she stayed awake. Every hour of clarity felt like digging herself out of a grave someone else had buried her in. Her hands steadied, her thoughts aligned, and in the quiet between symptoms, Catherine began to speak. At first, it came in pieces. The smell, it was like burned copper. Then more. I remember the robes. They weren't cloth, they shimmered. There were symbols I didn't recognize. One looked like a horned crown. And finally, I wasn't the only child watching. There was someone else once, a boy. I think they caught him. She spoke of things no one should know. The structure of the cellar, the way it flooded in summer, the trap door behind the altar. She spoke of her father disappearing at night, returning with blood on his collar and no explanation. She spoke of a group she had named in her journals, the Brethren of the Harvest. Catherine had written for years, moments of clarity hidden among madness, pages coded in symbols, metaphors, word games only she understood. She had dozens of them. Ezekiel listened without flinching. Then it was his turn. He spoke of Sarah, of Benjamin, of Ruth, and the silence that followed. He told her about Silas's visit to Virginia, about the smile, about how nothing, not even the grief, could erase the moment he realized someone like Silas would never feel guilt. They sat across from each other like survivors from different wars, both shell-shocked, both burned, both still standing. It was Catherine who said it first. "We are not alone." She was right. Ezekiel had noticed patterns, a housemaid named Judith who lingered too long outside rooms, a stable boy who seemed to always look away at the right moment, a cook who never flinched when Catherine screamed upstairs. People who had seen too much and said nothing because silence was safer. But silence does not mean ignorance. Catherine began testing them. Small questions, quiet moments. "Have you heard footsteps in the cellar? Do you know what the Brethren are? Do you want them gone?" Some said nothing. Some walked away. But others, enough, gave the smallest nods, the kind that said, "Yes, I know. Yes, I want them gone." The plan began there. Step 1 was survival. Step 2 was memory. Step 3 was the ledger. Catherine believed the Brethren kept records, rituals, names, victims, not out of sentiment, but out of mutual guilt. If everyone was equally complicit, no one could betray the others. The ledger, if it existed, would be the key to everything. But getting to it meant more than unlocking a door. It meant understanding the rhythms of the house, the way Silas moved, the timing of his meetings, the way the staff rotated. Ezekiel paid attention. He learned when Silas traveled, once a month to Charleston for 3 days. He always took his manservant. He never left instructions. The next trip was May 14th. They had 2 weeks. 2 weeks to map the cellar, to decode Catherine's journals, to assemble a list of names. 2 weeks to decide what would happen if they found proof. "What will you do?" Catherine asked one night. Ezekiel didn't answer immediately. Finally, he said, "I want the ledger, and then I want them to suffer." Catherine smiled grimly. "Good,
because I want them to beg first." By now, Catherine could walk, slowly, carefully, but each step was hers. Her mind was clear, her voice was steady. She practiced saying the names of the men who would stood over that altar like someone preparing to spit poison. She no longer wanted healing. She wanted retribution, and she was willing to be patient for it.
On the morning of May 14th, Silas Rutledge left Cypress Grove by carriage. It was the third Thursday of the month, as always, Charleston bound, gone for 3 days. Catherine watched the carriage vanish through the trees from her bedroom window. She held her breath for a full minute after it disappeared, as if expecting it to turn back. It didn't. They had 3 nights. That evening, as the house quieted, Catherine changed into dark clothes, simple, movable, her hair tied back, no corset, no jewelry, only purpose. Ezekiel waited in the corridor, a lantern shuddered low in his hands. He said nothing, neither did she. They moved like 2 halves of one idea, down the servants' staircase, through the kitchen, behind the pantry. There, where the wood paneling met the stone foundation, Catherine pressed a spot only she knew. A dull click, a seam appeared. A hidden door swung open. The air behind it hit like a slap, wet, stale, wrong. They stepped inside. 27 wooden steps curved downward. The light from Ezekiel's lantern caught details as they descended. Carvings etched into the stone, grooves in the handrail from decades of use, the bloodstain that never fully faded from the edge of a beam. They reached the main chamber. It was larger than Ezekiel expected, nearly 30 feet square. The walls were stone, sweating moisture. The air hummed with stillness. In the center sat the altar, a wooden table, heavy and scarred, channels carved along its edges for fluid to drain. Dried stains still clung to the grain. Robes hung on the wall, crimson trimmed, ritual garments that smelled of smoke and iron. Along the far wall, books, boxes, sealed jars neither of them wanted to open. But Catherine moved with purpose. She approached a section of wall that looked like the rest, until she pressed her palm flat and twisted. Click, a panel shifted, revealing a second door. Behind it, the inner sanctum. A smaller room, 10 feet by 10, cold, drier than the outer chamber. And in its center stood the ledger. It was massive, nearly 2 feet tall, bound in dark leather with brass hinges and a clasp that looked recently polished. It rested on a stand like a holy object. Around it sat smaller journals, a locked chest, and more jars sealed with wax. Ezekiel's stomach turned. Catherine approached the ledger and flipped the clasp. It opened with a creak that felt louder than any scream. Inside, handwritten records. Meticulous, neat, dated. 1800 to present. Dozens of entries. Each page listed date, location, names of those present, type of sacrifice, purpose of ritual, outcome. Rituals were held every 6 weeks, aligned with moon cycles and agricultural planting or harvesting. The brethren believed blood nourished the soil and that sacrifice, especially of the unwilling, infused the land with power. Victims were categorized, enslaved individuals most common, unclaimed vagrants, children born with defects, volunteers, listed only twice. Then came the most grotesque detail. Consumption. Certain rituals called for participants to ingest parts of the victim, cooked, prepared, explained clinically as symbolic ingestion of strength. Ezekiel turned pale. He stepped back, breath shallow. This is... He couldn't finish the sentence. Yes, Catherine said quietly. It is. She moved to another journal, opened it, skimmed pages. This one lists who provided the sacrifices, how they were acquired. She turned to a page dated October 38. Ezekiel leaned in. Acquired, 1 female adult,
Sarah. 1 male child, Benjamin. 1 female child, Ruth. Source: Virginia plantation. Separation from male parent enforced for ritual demonstration. 3 lines. That was it. 3 lines for the destruction of his life. Ezekiel sat down slowly on the cold stone floor. His hands shook. Catherine didn't speak. She placed a hand on his shoulder. When he looked up, there were no tears, only flame behind his eyes. They copied what they could. They brought blank paper, ink, a writing board. They moved fast but carefully, choosing the most damning pages, ritual details, full names of current members, records from the last 5 years. After 2 hours, they had a small bundle of evidence. Then came the sound. Footsteps. From above. Catherine froze. Ezekiel killed the lantern. Darkness. The cellar door creaked. Then light. Lanterns. Voices. Multiple. Catherine clutched Ezekiel's arm. He leaned in, whispered, "They shouldn't be back. It's too early." But it wasn't. They heard the voice clearly. Silas Rutledge. "I watched the house all evening. I knew you couldn't resist." He stood there, flanked by 2 men, both in robes. Behind them, at least 4 more. The brethren. Gathered. Prepared. Catherine stepped in front of Ezekiel, spine straight. "You were supposed to be in Charleston." "I was, but I never trusted your recovery. You've never been as clever as you think." He stepped fully into the room, eyes sweeping across the open ledger, the copied pages. Disgust curled on his face. "You would betray your own blood for revenge, for this man." He didn't wait for an answer. "To the study," he said to the others. "We need to decide what happens next." They were disarmed, led upstairs, locked in Silas's office. And for the first time, both Ezekiel and Catherine understood what they were truly facing. Not just power, not just evil, but men who had existed for 40 years in absolute silence and were ready to kill to preserve it.
The study door locked behind them with a finality that felt like a verdict. Ezekiel paced. Catherine stood still, her mind racing. "We lost the element of surprise," she said, "but we haven't lost the fight." "We have no weapons," Ezekiel replied. "No allies in this room. No escape." She turned to him, eyes sharp. "Do you really think I planned this without preparing for betrayal?" Then she pulled the folded pages from inside her dress, the copied entries from the ledger. Silas hadn't searched her. He'd assumed she was broken again. That was his mistake. Ezekiel stared at the papers. Proof, not just of murder, but of legacy. "How long do we have?" she asked. Before he could answer, footsteps returned. The door opened. A man Catherine recognized, Marcus Fanning, stood there, face pale but composed. "They're waiting." They were led downstairs again. The cellar had changed. The altar had been cleaned and draped in crimson, candles in every corner, all 13 chairs of the brethren occupied. Silas stood at the center. "Brothers of the harvest, we face a breach. My daughter and this man have uncovered our sanctum. They've read our ledger. Their punishment should be obvious, but I propose something more powerful." He turned to Ezekiel. "Join us." A murmur passed through the room. "You lost everything because of me," Silas continued. "I took your family, but I offer you something in return. Power, access, revenge against the man who worked your wife and children to death, Edward Gaines of Alabama. He is not one of us. He has no protection. Join us, and we will give you everything you need to destroy him." Ezekiel didn't move. Silas stepped closer. "Refuse, and Catherine dies. Then you, and every trace of your story disappears." He looked to the other members.
Let the ledger remain sacred. Let this test prove that even those who hate us cannot resist power." Catherine turned to Ezekiel slowly. Her voice was cold. "If you do this, I'll haunt you until your dying breath." Ezekiel spoke only one word. "Agreed." Gasps, nods. Silas smiled. The ritual began at midnight. They brought a young enslaved woman forward, barely 19, bound, gagged, terrified, placed on the altar like an offering. Silas handed Ezekiel a knife. "Make the first cut," he said. The room pulsed with darkness. Chanting began, low, rhythmic, foreign. Ezekiel stepped forward. The woman's eyes met his. He saw Sarah, Ruth, Benjamin, and he moved. But not toward the woman. The knife flashed and plunged into the throat of the nearest Brethren member. Blood sprayed. The man collapsed. Screams followed. Ezekiel grabbed his robe, flung it into a row of candles. The flames spread. The chamber exploded into chaos. He freed the girl, shouted, "Run!" She bolted up the stairs. Then the sound of thunder came from above. Footsteps, dozens. Catherine had not gone to Philadelphia. She had stayed, and she had gathered people, field hands, houseworkers, laborers from neighboring plantations who had lost family, friends, children. 23 arrived in the night with blades and rage. They stormed the cellar. The brethren, fat with power, soft with comfort, were not ready. Marcus Fanning died first, crushed beneath a hammer. Reverend Crenshaw begged for mercy and was cut down mid-prayer. Judge Pelham tried to run. He didn't make it past the stairs. Silas, in the confusion, grabbed Catherine, a knife to her throat. "Stop!" he screamed. "I'll kill her!" The room stilled. Catherine didn't blink. "Then do it," she said. Silas froze. "I saw you murder a woman. I watched you drink her blood. For 16 years you told me it was all in my head, but it wasn't." And then she rammed her elbow into his ribs. He staggered. The knife fell. Ezekiel was already moving. Silas fell to the floor, winded, eyes wide. Ezekiel stood over him. "You sold my family to prove a point. Now I make mine." Silas tried to speak, but Ezekiel said nothing. He ended it, quickly, without mercy. One by one, the rest of the brethren fell. 13 men who had controlled a county with fear and secrecy were reduced to blood and ash in a stone cellar. The fire was next. Catherine and Ezekiel stacked the ledgers, robes, ritual tools, all of it, onto the altar. They poured oil. They lit the match. The fire caught fast. They watched from the yard as Cypress Grove burned. By sunrise, nothing remained but black beams and smoke drifting east. The others scattered, back to plantations, towns, swamps. None would speak of this night. They had seen what power truly looked like when it was taken back. The official story was simple: a tragic fire. Silas Rutledge and 12 prominent men dead. His mad daughter gone. No mention of Ezekiel. No mention of the ledger. No mention of the cellar. Catherine disappeared north under a new name. Ezekiel moved west where no one asked questions. But the stories remained, whispers among enslaved communities, of a man who walked into hell and walked back out, of a woman who remembered what power did and refused to be silent, of a night when justice came with fire. They never saw each other again, but they had already done what needed doing, because in the end, it wasn't the ledger that mattered, it was memory. And memory, once awakened, does not die.